Morning, everyone. You're all very welcome. So I was just going to start by saying I think my experience of newly and recently qualified chartered accountancy members in the last couple of years through COVID and even before that is that they're very informed nowadays. And when it comes to looking at careers, job searching, understanding a market, and so on, they're very tuned in as to what they need to be looking at. You're all qualified professionals at the end of the day. So what I'm going to try and do is make this as useful, as informative, and try to think of the things that aren't quite as obvious in terms of what impacts on a newly qualified or recently qualified chartered accountant when they're looking at their career building and their job search mechanisms. So with that said, just a quick intro in terms of myself. I'm a member of the Institute. I qualified in 2009, so I'm FCA. I do remember qualifying like it was yesterday, however, taking the head up out of the books and trying to figure out a whole career plan and where to go now that all the studies were done. So it was a really big crossroads. It was a great opportunity, but I must say I felt myself that I was very underprepared. I didn't really know where to look. So hopefully, if you're in that position, this morning will be useful. And as I said, I'm going to try and make it as punchy as possible. Talking to Karen Landigan yesterday, it was interesting. There are going to be about 700 new members qualifying in March and April this year, roughly, alongside yourself, perhaps. And many of them will be traveling abroad, staying in their training practices, and so on. But it's that time of year when a large number are coming out of training contracts and having a look at the market. So hopefully this helps you from a competitive perspective and gives you a little bit of an edge, a differentiator. And hopefully the tips and suggestions I give you this morning aren't just for the next few months. They're actually useful going into the years ahead in terms of building your career plan and beyond. So hopefully there's a bit of longevity in that. So we kick off just the objectives for this morning as laid out. You probably would have seen. We're going to have a quick look at the jobs market. We're going to have a quick look at salary and package considerations, the key elements in terms of building your career and tips on that. We'll allude to your personal brand and knowing yourself a little bit, your own SWOT analysis and strengths and weaknesses, a bit around how to make the right career choices and decisions and maybe some pitfalls around that. Then your career project, as I call it, action list, and just to give you some key takeaways and things you can get off the mark with in the next few months. And then, of course, look, career isn't quite the be all and end all. Managing your well-being and your health and well-being is an important piece of that as well, just to mention towards the end. So you fly into it. The market for 2022 was really interesting kickoff to the year this year. January can be quite slow sometimes, but it really came out of the blocks very quickly this year. And in quick summary, it's a very good time to be newly or recently qualified. There is an abundance of opportunities out there at the moment. The market is very strong. And I was actually on with the young professionals group last week. We were doing a coffee roulette with our Australian counterparts, which was really informative. Their travel is back again. Australia is opening up. And no doubt a lot of newly qualifieds are looking at international moves and heading towards Sydney again and so on. So all of that is back. It seems to be really good on that front. Mentioning travel, we've seen a glut of internal audit opportunities recently, and speaking to Rachel in PeopleSource last week on that coffee roulette, she endorsed that internal audit is a fantastic move out into industry as a first move out of practice, and really worth looking at. And if you have an appetite to travel, it's a great way to do 40 or 50% travel in them if they're in industry. I would say when it comes to the market, as buoyant as it is at the moment, be very vigilant. Markets can turn, like 2022 looks really good at the moment, but you need to keep your eyes open, and you need to keep taking the temperature constantly by speaking to your peers, recruiters, etc., and keep your finger on the pulse that way. Employers are very tuned into the seasonality of the qualification cycle at the moment as well. So they'll be aware that there's 700 new members coming out into the market at the moment. There will be roles there. It'll be quite competitive, but they understand the seasonality of the chartered accountants qualification life cycle at the moment as well. In saying that the market is very good at the moment, it doesn't mean that it's always the right choice to make a move just because you're finishing your contract. Sometimes staying on for 6 months in your practice or your existing employer can be a good option. Particularly if you're valued, if there are opportunities to move into other divisions, it can often look really good to get an endorsement by your current employer to stay on. It reflects really well when you do ultimately go and make that move. It speaks to your track record. We are living in a world of accelerated change. There are a lot of emerging sectors at the moment. We've got like sustainability, AI, data analytics, fintech. There are new healthcare and insurance models out there at the moment as well. There's new Chinese and US companies coming into Ireland. So it's a very exciting time. There's an awful lot of change. You really need to stay on top of it and keep a close eye on new companies coming into the country. The market is still, however, kind of split in two different halves, I would say. Probably one more buoyant than the other still, the same as the last 2 years, where you've got pharma, healthcare, technology on one side in a growth phase, actively recruiting, and then you've got leisure, entertainment, etc. on the other side, less growth. So really, when you're in the early years of your career post-qualification, you want to be getting into a company where you have an opportunity to grow, take on new projects, new skills, and so on. And so more often than not, that will be in a company that's expanding and growing itself. So keep an eye on that piece. Practice, as a sector, the landscape in practice, they're screaming out for good chartered accountants at the moment. Like, the demand is still very high. So if you enjoy practice and want to stay within that space, the opportunities are going to be there for you. And we can talk about salaries in a minute, because practice are kind of looking at salaries as well. Funds, financial services, still massive demand in that space as well. So the financial services sector typically has had very strong demand over the last number of years. Obviously due to Brexit. Salaries have been strong, packages and benefits are very strong in that front as well. So, yeah. Decentralized, remote working, flexibility, they're all established trends in the market at the moment. The hybrid model is coming back in. We're going back into the office in the Institute in the next week as well. And that's here to stay. So if it's important to you in terms of your job search, the opportunities are there. It's nice to be back in the office and kind of from a social perspective as well, from a networking and from a personal profile perspective as well. It's an important piece. So keep a balanced view on that. Mentioning Brexit there, it does seem to be still having a positive effect for Ireland, and the knock-on effect of the likes of Barclays, JP Morgan, a lot of big banks and financial services organisations have established their hubs in Ireland. The IFSC is benefiting strongly from that. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment that we need to keep an eye on. So if you're on the financial services side, that should remain strong as well. I've just put down the bottom here a link. If you get the slides, you can follow that link to a really good market report that the Institute has done recently on 2022, the outlook and the story so far. Well worth a read, and it goes into a bit more detail than I've done here. we need to keep out. I've mentioned Ukraine there. Obviously, we need to keep a close eye on that developing situation as well. And inflation, I think, may come up in another slide, and that's another thing to keep a close eye on. So all good, but keep an eye on the risk factors. Salaries, as I mentioned. So practice salaries, industry salaries, and financial service salaries are all good at the moment. You know, you'll hear from a few different angles that base salaries are increasing massively. I saw an Irish Times report there a few weeks ago that accountants' salaries are making huge jumps. The reality on the ground, I think this has been endorsed by a couple of recruiters that I've spoken with, you know, that there's incremental jumps there at the moment. Like there's good demand, and so salaries are stepping up slightly. I think where you are seeing a bit more flexibility and push is around the benefits, and where employers are a little bit more open to negotiation on that. And that's probably, if you are looking at new opportunities, that's where you'll get the best bite, looking at small bonuses, you know, pension, VHI, subs being paid, annual leave, funds being paid, things like that. So it's worth having a look at that in terms of package if you get any offers in the months ahead. Inflation, I mentioned there, it's one key piece to watch. It's come up in a couple of webinars through the Institute recently. Just when it comes to salaries, it's good to allow for that, I suppose. The average salary range for a newly qualified can be between 50 and 55. Typically, you know, in some cases, it'll push towards the 60 if there's particular skill sets that really match with the employer, like sector experience, key clients experience, or, you know, very strong academic prowess and track record of achievement and rated 1 in your firm and stuff like that. So between 50 and 60 roughly. In saying that, an important point that, again, look, I'm probably preaching to the converted. Salary should never really be a key decision maker when you're building a career. Typically, even later in your career, I get a lot of FCAs speak to me about salary not being top of their list. It's about third on their list in terms of motivation for a move. You know, salary will come. It's just important to recognize that you're building a career step by step. And as you go through it, making sure that you're in companies that you enjoy, that you're in the sector that you enjoy and you're being challenged, the salary will come with that. Just some early consideration for career tips. What I would say is to invest time in your continuous career project, as I call it. And I think it's important to look at your career path as a project that you constantly chip away at. I'd encourage you to treat it like a year-round project. And if you do, then you'll have the edge on your candidate competition. Constantly examine the risk in your path and look to minimize it. You know, alluding to some of the things we mentioned there a few minutes ago. Keep your eyes wide open versus the market. I'd recommend setting up a file or a spreadsheet, just a small hub where you gather all your career information, whether it's companies. You can have multiple tabs. You can set out your top 10 preferred companies. You can look at multiple different types of roles that you want to examine, but keep it all in a central place. This can be where you gather all your research information on the multitude of paths. We have a slide on the multitude of paths in a minute. Mentors, just mentioning it there, I always say have about 3 different mentors. First mentor can be from your family. It could be a really good business person within your family who knows you personally very well and your personality. Second mentor could be someone from from your current firm, or from your training firm, or from previous work, that knows how you work and what you're like in a business context and a work context, and can comment to you from that perspective. And number 3 then might be someone the Institute, through our mentorship program, puts you in touch with, who has been on the path that you want to tread, They can speak to you about how to follow in their footsteps effectively. And putting the opinions, the thoughts, and the advice of those three different people together should help you come up with your own design for your career path. So just to reiterate, be deliberate, map it out, build it, plan it. That's the important piece when it comes to career planning, just to make time for it and make a habit out of it, really. Chartered Accountants Ireland Careers Team has questionnaires for you if you want to kind of assess your own strengths, likes, passions, and what you're good at, what you're weak on, all of that. So if you need to approach us looking for questionnaires. Secondments, just to mention it as well, is a really good way to get industry experience and break away from that. Well, you know, you've been in practice for 3.5, 5 years and you don't have any industry experience. Secondments can sometimes be a good way of overcoming that. An important point to mention here, allow for life, be prepared to adjust and shift direction. Things happen, you know, everything from illness, marriage, kids, pets, international travel, all comes into the frame. And you know, all the way through your career, you're going to have to adjust and amend along the way. So just to call that out. And one of the more important points towards the end is just to build a network. We're gonna talk about that a little bit as well, because it's one of the most important things that I've learned. Your network is kind of everything. So we'll come to that. Okay, and so just to allude to how to find your typical steps to finding a new role. And it starts with your career audit. We'll have a separate slide on that, just assessing yourself firstly. What are your successes? Again, one pager, just listing those out for yourself. Self-reflection, a bit of a self-SWOT analysis, you know, to know where your gaps are, know what you're particularly strong at, what has previous bosses said you're very good at. Researching the market then is a massive piece. We have another slide on that in a minute, where, you know, really understanding the market to the point where you're as good as a recruiter in terms of understanding the market forces and what's going on is invaluable, and puts you ahead of the competition again, as mentioned. What are your USPs, your differentiators, your unique selling points? Know them implicitly. That's going to be valuable when it comes around to doing interviews, and you can sell your strengths. You know, you have stories built around those. Personal branding is another piece we're going to touch on in a minute, and it's a really important piece. So networking and personal branding go hand in glove, and you know, I'd almost say if there was one key thing to take away today, you really need to start tuning into that as a qualified chartered accountant now. That's the next platform for your career in terms of any career moves, career building. A lot of it is predicated on those two things. CV and interview preparation, I've kind of stayed away from a little bit with this presentation today, because there's other webinars online on the Institute's hub around both of those that you can look up. And if you need to hit me up one-to-one on CV reviews or interview preparation, more than happy to do that at any stage with members. Networking we'll touch on, and then agencies and job sites. That goes without saying in terms of just getting a handle on the market and finding a new role. Like I'd shy away from applying through job sites for roles. Agencies, like there are 3 ways to get a new role, and I can go into this on a one-to-one basis if need be. Number 1 is through a recruitment agency, a good recruitment agency that you trust and have a good relationship. Number 2 is warm, direct applications where you've done the research, you've looked at the connectivity in with the market, or with the employer rather, and you can make good warm approaches directly to the company. And number 3 then is through your personal network and leveraging that. So you need to be doing a little bit on all 3 of those. And you know, as I said, I can go into each of those more on a one-to-one consultation with any members as needed. This is hard to read. I don't expect you to read it. But I wanted to put it up there because it's a piece of work that myself and Karen did. And it's a really good resource. If you're at that stage where you're qualifying, coming out of contract, you need to start thinking about building a career path or a career plan. This is a really good starting point. It's a document on the Institute website, and it hits everything you need to be aware of in terms of mapping out your next steps. So you can see there everything from LinkedIn, market mapping, networking, recruiters, personal development, interview preparation, and so on. So it's just a checkbox exercise. Have I done this, that, and the other? Have you covered all bases? And once you can tick all those boxes, then you're really well set. It's about a 50-point checklist of actions that you can look through. This is a slide that gets commented on, I suppose, that recent and newly qualifying members seem to like, just as a reminder that there are so many differing opportunities and paths and titles and roles out there that you can go down. When I qualified, I wasn't aware that there were so many different paths you could take, and there's literally like 100. Look where I ended up. So it's you can use the qualification in so many different ways, everything from historical accounting to forward-looking kind of financial planning and accounting, everything from systems accounting to internal audit. They all use your professional skill set in a slightly different way. So take stock, analyze the paths, the market, and take a good look across the board at all the different opportunities. It's still only a small snapshot in terms of the extent of how you can use qualifications. So this isn't by any means. It's only a small snapshot on the type of roles you can look at. So a few top career tips, or I suppose tips that I think are quite useful. Starting with your personal brand, build it and guard it. Again, an awful lot of you probably realize that you have got a personal brand, but many don't. A personal brand is what? It's what people say about you when you leave the room, what you're noted for, what people think you're good at. So realize that you have one, build it, guard it, and develop it. And that can be, you can start on your LinkedIn profile, which is a kind of a personal branding, using keywords and so on. We'll look at that in a minute. But foster that, develop it, know in your current company what your personal brand is, and as I said, build on that. One good tip I found myself suggesting to members recently is to link in with chartered accountants who have gone 2 or 3 years ahead of you in their career path. So then may or may not be from your current practice and have been in your division, but similar people with a similar background to yourself, if they've trained in PwC audit or an IDB or whatever, where have they gone 2 or 3 years down the road? What kind of companies, what kind of routes have they taken with their careers? Don't be shy about looking at their profiles and the steps that they have made, the type of companies they've joined, the types of roles that they've picked up. You can learn an awful lot really quickly with a couple of clever searches on LinkedIn and just a quick examination of the LinkedIn profiles. And that will inform you really quickly. Year 1 post-qualification, some of you are already in that space, but I always feel that it gives you a license to try and test out new roles, whether it's through a contract, a 6-month or 12-month contract, that kind of pushes your skill sets, brings you into a new area or a new sector that you're interested in. You may not like it. I mean, it might not work out after 12 months, but at least you've tried it and you'll always pick something up from that. I think you have a license to do that in the first year or so post-qualification. Some recruiters, I think, would say to you, no, you need to decide on your path and go for it. And that's the trajectory that you're set off. My feeling and my experience is that members can go traveling, do very different kind of roles, and they come back with a different worldly view, more mature mindset. They've picked up the soft skills that they can kind of transfer into new roles, and they can kind of come back to base in terms of accounting. I'll give you an example of someone who was actually a CASI member who were placed into an ERP implementation role going back a few years ago. He was from Northern Ireland. He decided to come to Dublin, try a new city, try a new type of company, get stuck into systems. Sure, look, if it didn't work out, he could always head home, go back to more of the accounting kind of space. And he wouldn't lose anything after 12 months. If anything, he'd pick up, project management and interesting system skill sets. Now, as it happened, it worked out. He was right in terms of his self-analysis. He really enjoyed it. But if it hadn't, he would have reset back into more historical accounting roles or whatever very, very easily after a year. So we're keeping an eye on that. Another really important tip here, and again, this doesn't get said enough, is to think 2 moves ahead. So if you have a bit of a 5-year career plan, and you have an idea where you want to go, always think about, if I accept this role, how is it going to impact on the role I take after this? So if you're about to hit go on an offer, an acceptance of an offer in the months ahead, just think where it's going to get you. Are you going to stay in that role for 1 or 2 years? And after the 2-year mark, where does it get you? What does your CV look like at that point? And what sort of platform does it give you for that 5-year plan, and where you want to go with the next move after that? So and that goes for any step in your career, like even 3 or 4 moves down the road. What's the entry and the paragraph on your CV going to look like from accepting this role? Be vigilant of the Chartered Accountant's Pathway, which you'll see in a minute. There's a graphic on it. It's on the hub, the Institute hub. It's like a life cycle for chartered accountants, I suppose, and it looks at the skill sets that you need to pick up as you build your career path. So you can have a look at that as well. Contract options I've mentioned there, that can be a really good option where you're coming out of practice and you're just finishing your contract and you're not sure where you want to go. Contracts are a nice option for just testing out an area or a company or a sector. And an ex-colleague of mine read all his Accountancy Ireland back issues that he hadn't read during his traineeship on the train into work in the space of a couple of months. And he was incredibly knowledgeable having done that after a couple of months. So just a tip, it can be really useful. You can see all the movers and shakers in your network and in various different sectors. So Karen often polls her audience on these webinars to see who has a career plan, and typically 80 or 90% don't have one, and I expect it's similar here today. As recently qualified, I wouldn't expect you to have a fully fledged career plan, but a good starting point is to do a career audit. If you do have a career plan, it immediately puts you ahead of your competition. That's this slide here. Actually, there is a link to a career plan, which is quite detailed. It'll give you the format of how to start building one for yourself. And if you want to step through that, that's the link for it there. To come back to this though, in terms of career audit. I would say start with a good strong self-analysis, a blank piece of paper, mind map it out for yourself. We've alluded to the 5-year goal. Know your route to where you are today and analyze that. Look at the decisions you've made along the way, what worked, what didn't work, and why, in terms of the pieces of work you've done, the clients you've worked on, the jobs you've worked on. What soft skills have you developed along that route? These are going to be things you're going to incorporate into your CV, and you're going to be talking about at an interview stage. What have your key achievements been? Like on your CV, some ACAs will put a subsection of key achievements on their CV, which is always a consideration. It can look very well. It's not for everybody, but it can actually look quite well. What did you enjoy and why? You know, so that could give you a compass for the next steps in your career as well. I've covered the career plan piece, which I highly recommend. Research the market. When it comes to a job move, it really is the market that dictates, and so many people forget this. So what do I mean by this? For example, some SME employers don't necessarily want big four applicants because there's a mismatch there in terms of the scale and a familiarity with hitting the ground running. Some industry multinationals don't want financial services oriented ACAs who have worked with FS clients in the past, for example, because they find it's too much of a hurdle to jump over that fence into understanding industry. Some PLCs, for example, don't want small firm ACA applicants because they don't understand the scale of operation that they're dealing with. Now, these are all very vague, and it's just what employers sometimes look for. And sometimes the employers are demanding, you know, and looking for particular things from applicants. And it's just for you to be aware of that. Recruiters can give you a guide on that. Luckily, in the current market at the moment, a lot of those blockers are removed, and you know, really the world is your oyster at the moment in terms of applications. As I said, the market's very buoyant on all fronts, and it's easy at the moment, but it may not be on the second and third job move that you make. You probably need to just be very vigilant of those market forces, and particularly when you're in a particular track with your career. Keeping your finger on the pulse of the market and its trends, and being able to tell recruiters what's happening and what you see happening in the market is a really powerful thing to be able to do. I've seen some of the best chartered accountants, candidates and members down through the years. They're not necessarily the ones who have got the best exam results or placed in their exams or anything like that, but they're just very career focused. They always know what's going on in the market and what trends. They're keeping an eye on their own risk factors, and they're pivoting into, you know, areas that give them the best opportunities for their career. So just to be savvy like that a little bit. As mentioned here on the slide, speak to your contacts, build relationships with recruiters, partner with them, equally with ourselves and the careers team. Keep an eye on job sites, get your alerts, your feeds from LinkedIn and from various job sites, and be aware of the sectors that are performing well, e.g. tech, farm, FMCG and farm and so on. And just be proactive around all that. Build it into your week or your month as a habit. Friday afternoon, Friday morning, just kind of spending half an hour on what's happening in the market. So we mentioned personal branding. And I said already, I suppose, that sometimes newly quals and recently quals need to be reminded that they have a personal brand, and to guard it and grow it. LinkedIn really is your PR tool when job searching, and it's a good place to start in terms of your personal brand. LinkedIn really is essential. So look, as newly qualified and recently quals, I think you're very tuned into this. It's different for FCA members to a degree, but you should regard LinkedIn as your business card. It's like an appendix to your CV, and it's an important weekly habit and check-in, as mentioned. You should utilize it to make your brand more visible. So it's the vehicle for promoting your personal brand. Couple of tips on LinkedIn: invest in a professional photograph. Like, make sure it's not just a random kind of amateur photograph. Put up a very professional, business-like one. Highlight your qualifications. Make sure you're linked with the institute. Any particular key achievements, make sure they're mentioned on there. Keywords is probably one of the bigger. I should have asterisked that. It's one of the big elements when it comes to LinkedIn. If you want to move your career in a particular direction, like FP&A and so on, start mentioning planning, analysis as keywords, etc., within your LinkedIn profile, and they get picked up on. And the perception is that your brand is kind of oriented that way. Join groups that make sense. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of groups on there that will make sense from a sector perspective, from a skill set perspective, from an institute, organization, connectivity. There are communities on there that you can leverage and really get involved with follow companies. So if you have a top 10 list of companies that you're really interested in, go on, follow them. Your feed will become informed by the details that are the activities of those companies and the news, and you'll stay automatically up to date with what's going on in those companies, in those finance teams, etc. And again, it helps keep you ahead of the curve. Share, post, be active, and again, keep your profile high, and that will push your personal brand out there. So one of the best tips that I can give you today is to start building and investing in your network. You're fully qualified now. It's Ireland at the end of the day. It's who you know. It's the old cliche. It's still as true as ever. And it's so powerful as your career matures. So not just for the months ahead, but for your career as a whole, it's a really important point. And after 14 years in recruitment, like I can see clearly from all the chartered accountants that I've placed and worked with, that networking really is the spine of a successful career. And the members that are deliberate about it are always the ones that seem to achieve their career goals. And as mentioned here, it becomes a platform as an FCA. 10 years down the road, when you go to make that big move as an FCA, the big career move that you'll stay in for years and years, that's predicated on your networking. Your network is what will get you that, by and large. So how do I build and grow my network? So ex-colleagues, connecting, soft connection through LinkedIn, little message saying, just looking to connect, touching base with people, pick their brains, just as in, do you mind if I kind of just give you a quick buzz or ask you something, etc. Just connecting in with people on a regular basis. Social media, like, share, discuss, interaction with people from an online basis is really powerful. Again, I'm preaching to the converted, but even to the point of, like, if you're on online events or in-person events coming back again now, just who has attended those events. Keep a close eye on attendee lists and so on. I've mentioned join groups, but one other one that I sometimes forget to mention, and it's really important actually, because I was when I qualified, I suppose I tended to kind of step away from the institute. The exams were done, the books were put away, I got the letters, and I just wanted to get on with work really at that stage. And the reality is that it's a great opportunity in the couple of years post-qualification to actually get even closer to the institute rather than further away like I did. And there's a huge amount of branding, kudos, profile to be leveraged with the institute if you get involved in committees or just look for any way to get involved with the institute and stay close to it. It will stand to you. It's a nice entry onto the CV if you can get it. So just a couple of quick slides on dealing with an offer. If you get one in the months ahead, by all means, just give us a buzz if you need any advice or to talk through an offer, whether it's right for you or not. What I would say is that, like, the ideal is obviously to get multiple offers in the months ahead. If you are actively looking, you're going to be faced with turning down some offers then and accepting one and being selective in terms of what you're interested in. But I would say, if you're not interested in a role, don't go all the way to kind of offer stage with it necessarily. Be deliberate about your decisions that way. It can be frustrating for recruiters and for employers, and it's not great for your personal brand if you're kind of just going all the way to offer and then turning down roles. So be as honest with yourself as possible on that front. A couple of quick pointers here with career objectives. You know, what is the role going to give you? So if you're in it for the next year, 2 years, you know, which is probably the max at the early stage of your career path post qualification, what are you going to get out of this? We alluded to it earlier. What skills, what transferable skills, what experience? Is there people management? Will you learn new project management, new systems? Does it give you an opportunity to shift into a different area? So to go from financial services clients into industry, for example. What are the long-term prospects in that company? Like, are you going to be at a plateau after a year or two with nowhere else to go? And what other opportunities exist in the organization? Keeping up in mind, you know, treat it like a stepping stone. And as mentioned, it doesn't have to be a long-term move. You know, and employers recognize this, which recently qualified chartered accountants, that they're not necessarily looking to. I've old school clients who sometimes will come to me and say, you know, we've great opportunity for a financial accountant or a newly qualified accountant, and there's great succession planning, and you know, in 5 years' time they might be the financial controller. It's very rare. I don't think employers are kind of thinking that way anymore. You know, they recognize that you'll build up a portfolio of different jobs, different sectors, different companies. Okay, this is the career pathway slide that I mentioned. Some of you have really enjoyed studying down through recent years. Some of you are glad to see the back of it. I know I loved it. But we're very glad to see the back of it. You know, the years post-qual, the initial years post-qualification are a great opportunity to learn on the job, to upskill, to get new soft skills, and so on. Some of you will go on, do loads of CPD, additional courses, additional training, and that's really good. Short, punchy courses can be very useful in terms of helping you to pivot into another area. You know, whether you're doing that formally through courses or whether you're in a role that's challenging you and making you learn new things, you are always learning and always adding to your skills. That's the important thing and thread all the way through your career. If you're standing still, you're not learning, and you're in a comfort zone, you're going backwards. So be really vigilant of that as you step through your career. Yeah, like this career pathway slide, as I mentioned, I like to regard it as kind of the life cycle of a chartered accountant. And it is worth a review just to see, do I have a deficit in skill set in certain areas, or what skills will I need to grow in order to reach the next level of my path? So breaks it down into 4 different distinct sections there. Have a look through it. As mentioned, it's on the Institute Hub, and it's worth a 15-minute scan just to see, are you on the track, or are there certain skills that you need to have a look at. Also, just an important mention as well, I've already said that a career is only a small part of life, and in the years ahead, there's going to be, you know, a lot of other things coming into your frame. So be prepared to pivot and adjust along the way and keep your eye on the prize. But if you need to speak to someone in the Institute about this bigger picture and why that's why chartered accountant support is there for you, and it now has a couple of different sections to it. So one side is for more the financial aspect, and the other side, Thrive, is more for the personal health and well-being aspect as well. And Dee and Francesca, who run chartered accountant support, are excellent. They're brilliant. They're on with members on a daily basis on a variety of different fronts, and it's a really good resource. It's very important that you know it's there as well. Look, we've had a couple of tough years, and I've seen everything from people looking for part-time roles to coming back into the market and after several years out. The work-life balance has become a really big thread in the last few years, as well as the flexible working and so on. So the whole market and the whole paradigm is changing up a little bit, but it's important. The key message is that you know that the Institute has this facility for you, which operates on a number of fronts now as well, and keep an eye on health and well-being. And just a reminder then as well that new and recently qualified members like to use the careers team as a safe initial step into the market. It's a really good touch point. It's an impartial view. Like if you're looking for an impartial view of the jobs landscape, and we do encourage you to use this as a sounding board for career decisions, for interview preparation, for CV review, and even on advice on work scenarios as well. We've had plenty over the last kind of year or so where there have been difficult scenarios in work and people need to talk it through. So we're here for that as well. So ultimately, dragged on a little longer than I thought, but hopefully a bit of time for the odd question or two if needed. A couple of actions to take away. What I would say is that it's a very exciting time in your career. It's a real crossroads, that's mentioned. Put some planning and some time into it. It will reap rewards and dividends. Gain clarity on what you want. Get to know yourself a little bit. Do a self-analysis. Do the assessments. And be ready when opportunity knocks. I mentioned CV and interview stuff there as well. If you need to connect in with me on a one-to-one basis on that, that's why the Institute Careers team is here for those consultations and just check in at any stage at all. And ultimately, the very best luck then with your next steps, and lean on the careers team as needed. Thanks for listening. So if there's any questions, I think they might come through Q&A or through the chat. I don't know if Chris is gonna, I'll keep an eye on anything that does come through there. If there's none, it probably means I've answered everything through the slides. We have one. So just want to ask if Chartered Accountancy Ireland has heard of the Big Four practices intending to increase salaries. Currently in several months out of contract and on 45k and starting to become a consideration. Yeah, good question. You've probably seen like the guidance I gave there in terms of salary levels, roughly, I suppose. If you're several months out of contract, that might mean you're still in the same practice and on 45k with say 6 months PQE. That it does seem a little low if you're in Big Four practice. I would have thought typically for Big Four, someone now transitioning out of contract and maybe they're staying on as an audit senior or an AM, for example, typically that's like around 48, maybe 50. I don't know, probably even slightly better than that if you're rated 1 and stuff like that. You know, so like I mentioned, salary probably isn't the be all and end all. The important piece is to get into a sector and a role that you know you're going to enjoy. But there's good demand in the practice space there at the moment. 45k seems a little low for Big Four. If you were making a move into industry, you'd certainly be looking at the 50k plus there as well, I'd say. You know, ultimately have a good chat. Like one thing I didn't mention there was internal sponsors in your practice or your company. It's really important that you foster good relationships and you can sit down, have a cup of coffee and an off the record kind of interpersonal chat and relationship with people in your business who have your back and give you kind of, you know, direction and career advice and bordering on mentor kind of stuff. So if you can have that internally and even touch on salaries, that can be really, really valuable as well. Kind of a roundabout answer on that one. Where can I access the career questionnaires you mentioned earlier? Yeah, we have. Just drop me an email on those. We have a couple of online ones that we can link you to just for that bit of self-assessment. A lot of newly qualified and recent qualifieds are still a little bit unclear as to what direction they want to go, what they're good at, what they like. And sometimes that formal questionnaire and self-assessment kind of spits out the answer for you, you know, or at least it'll give you a little bit of a guide. It took my mentor to say to me 14 years ago, recruitment, I think you could be good at that. At the time, I took it as a kind of an insult because I thought it was a good accountant at the time. But, you know, sometimes people see things in you that you don't see yourself as well. So as well as the career questionnaire, it's worth picking the brains of your mentors and seeing what they say. Is it rare to find a 6-month contract in the industry? I'm working on one at the moment. Or is it better to take a permanent role and leave after 6 months? I would not recommend taking a permanent role and leaving after 6 months because, first off, it damages your personal brand. You know, it's a little disingenuous to the employer. You're better off saying to them, like, if it's a role you're really interested in, you could propose to them that you do it on a 6-month basis. The market is such at the moment that you could actually have, they might agree to that and say, great, look, I mean, you're really good for the role. We'll take you on for 6 months and let's just sit down then after that and see how it goes if you want to make it permanent at that point. There are contracts out there. Like a lot of people might be thinking at the moment, I'll do 6 months work through the summer. If I can find a contract, and then I'll head to Australia in September, October. You know, there's quite a bit of that at the moment, and it is worth keeping an eye on that. As I said, we're working with a few. You know, the 6-month contract could mean you stay on with your existing practice as well. Maybe even move into a different division for 6 months and get a slightly different experience. You know, so you can leverage that relationship as well. Rough salary guide for Northern Ireland. Apologies. I thought, you know, I meant to put sterling in there. I was very conscious when I was putting in the euro signs. Thank you for asking that question. Because of course we are all regions, all Ireland, and doing quite a bit of work with Northern Ireland at the moment. Actually, there's a lot of demand in Belfast. So thanks for asking that. And like speaking about the market, it's very much the same in Northern Ireland. A lot of demand in both industry and practice. We're partnered with a couple of big clients in around the Belfast region at the moment. Salary levels for newly qualified chartered accountants, say coming out of Big Four in Northern Ireland, would be, my sense would be around the 37, 38 sterling. It hovers between 35 and 40, again, just depending on track record and profile and so on. But, you know, different jurisdiction and market to a degree in a sense of cost of living and salaries, and obviously sterling and so on. But I think roughly around that as a guide. Hopefully that answers that for you. There's good demand in industry in Northern Ireland if you're looking. Obviously a little bit more public sector in terms of the profile of companies and so on. And there's a little bit more tendency to stick with employers in Northern Ireland as well, I think, and build careers within organizations. And there's probably a stronger stick with practice kind of mentality in Northern Ireland as well, for what it's worth. So hopefully that's okay. That's useful on salaries. That could be it on questions. Oh, there's one last one. 45 in one of the Big Fours at the moment for newly qualified plus 1k benefit. Okay, and an increment then if you get rated higher. Yeah, sometimes it can come down to your internal rating. That's interesting to know. And thanks for that information. Yeah, it could be 45, 48. You know, look, if you move out into industry, like you certainly will get a move into the 50k kind of space. just be very careful. Like when you, by the time tax impacts on those few thousands, like it really comes down to negligible. And the important thing when you're deciding on offers and companies and sectors is that it feels right, that the people you're going to be working with feel right for you, having met them at interview. That's a really important tip, and it's often, I think that's how you should almost decide on where you go. Do I get on with the people? Is there a good click with the people I'm going to be working with? Because that can be a huge factor as well. So hopefully that's useful, guys. And look, if there's any other follow-up questions in the weeks and months ahead, as mentioned, first port of call, really impartial sounding board. We'd love to hear from you. Send in your CV. I'll give you assessment on it. If you need interview preparation advice, we do that all week long. And thanks for joining us today, and stay in touch as your career